All right. Like I said, it's good to have everybody here tonight. We are continuing our study with Esther and Mordecai. We're going to finish up Esther and hopefully finish up Mordecai tonight. Also, if you didn't notice when you walked in on the table in the foyer, there are notes for our next character study, or characters study as the case is, with Gaius, Demetrius, and Diotrephes, or Gaius, Diotrephes, and Demetrius. On the back table in they're covered in 3 John. So those will be our next points of study, or objects, or individuals, characters of study for after we're done with Esther and Mordecai. Last week we finished off in Esther chapter 7 and in verse 7, after Esther has revealed to the king the plan against, first of all, the Jews, and the fact that she is one of those Jews, and she's revealing this to the king and accusing Haman. Haman's the wicked man who has done this thing. Again, we don't know if the king knew that that's the people that Haman was talking about way back when Haman kind of planned this whole thing. It sounds like Haman wrote it out, and the king just gave his signet ring to sign off on it. It's likely whether the king was told it was the Jews or not, the king was more likely interested in the silver that Haman was going to pay to the king's treasuries, that it was going to be paid out through the pillaging of the Jews and their belongings. And so here in chapter 7 and in verse 7, after Esther says Haman's the one who's doing this thing, the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden, but Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. I think it's really interesting that King Ahasuerus, or King Xerxes, he's well known in history as being not necessarily a tyrant, but quick to react. Okay, not particularly the nicest guy around. He was a king and he acted like it. And it's interesting to me that the king leaves for a minute, almost like he needs to collect his thoughts. And I'm assuming that he's doing this because of his respect for Haman. Remember, what position had Haman achieved at this point? He's the right-hand man to the king. Okay, and so the king's going out for a minute to kind of process this. Haman is assuming that the king means evil for him. Now, it doesn't say that Haman's assuming he's going to die, although it does say he's pleading for his life. But we don't know that that's what the king has planned. Okay, we don't know what the king's reaction is going to be, and we're never going to find out because, verse 8, when the king returned from the palace garden to the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, "Will he also assault the queen while I am in the house?" As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So the king walks in as Haman has fallen over the couch where Esther is lying or sitting, and Haman is just pleading for his life. The king assumes he's attempting to assault the queen, and immediately a bag, a veil, or whatever is put over his head, which signifies what? Death. Yeah, you're scheduled for the execution now, bud. Okay, it's interesting. There's a slight part of you that might feel bad for Haman because it was misunderstood. That really wasn't his intention. But is Haman still a wicked dude? Yeah, he is. And the king's not going to listen to Haman. "Oh, no, king, it's not what you think." No. The king was already mad anyway, and this just pushed it over the edge. Whether the king intended to put him to death, I don't know. It would be interesting to know what the king had intended or what he had decided to do upon coming back, because it sounds like he comes back in, he's kind of gathered himself, maybe he's already figured out how he's going to handle this. Maybe he was just intending to demote Haman. Maybe he was going to exile him. But there's no reason to think necessarily that the king was going to kill Haman. But now, definitely. Verse 9, "Now Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, 'Look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman.' Then the king said, 'Hang him on it.' So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's wrath subsided." Okay, so kind of an interesting comeuppance for Haman to ultimately be hanged on the very, we say gallows, again, it's a huge impaling spike, 50 cubits high that everybody can see. It's ultimately Haman who ends up hanging on his own impaling spike and not Mordecai as was planned. But Esther, she did everything she could to provide the situation to give the best result for the Jews as she is telling the situation to the king. Okay? Now, having said that, anything through chapter 7. Going into chapter 8, we see the reaction from the king, and there's something very interesting to note here. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. All right, so now, after all this dust is settled, she reveals that Mordecai is actually my, cousin, or however she introduced him. Obviously, they are cousins, but he's my cousin, but my uncle, or he raised me like my dad, or whatever. But regardless, she's related to Mordecai. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. Being given his signet ring now represents what? Now he's second in charge. Okay? So the very position that Haman had, now Mordecai has, and we see that actually borne out in chapter 10 especially. But verse 3 is when Esther says, now what are we going to do about the Jews? Now Esther spoke again to the king, fell down at his feet, and implored him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews. And the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, if it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who are in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that will come to my people? Or how can I endure to see the destruction of my countrymen? So she appeals to the king. She appeals on her own behalf. She appeals on behalf of her people. What can we do about this? Can you repeal this commandment or this law that was put out? King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman. They have hanged him on the gallows because he tried to lay his hand on the Jews. You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews, as you please, in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's signet ring, no one can revoke. What does that mean? What's he saying about the decree that had been commissioned, albeit by Haman, but with the king's signet ring? Okay, you can't just cancel it? Say, oh, you know what, never mind. Sorry about that, mistake. Even the king, according to the laws of the Babylons, the Medes, the Persians, even the king didn't have authority to reverse a decree that had been sent out. Now, what can the king do? And in this case, in the name of the king, but through Haman through Mordecai and Esther. Okay, he can decree an additional decree that would have the effect of essentially attempting to counteract the former decree. Okay? He can't revoke the former decree, but he can send out another one to kind of try to balance it out. So the king's scribes, verse 9, were called at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded, to the Jews, the satraps, the governors, and the princes of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces in all, to every province in its own script, to every people in their own language, and to the Jews in their own script and language. So is this just like a little memo? Is this just like hey, just by the way? This is a big deal, okay? Just as big a deal as the decree that was sent out to destroy the Jews, this one has just as much importance. Verse 10, he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, sealed it with the king's signet ring, and sent letters by couriers on horseback, riding on royal horses bred from swift steeds, By these letters, the king permitted the Jews who were in every city to gather together and protect their lives, to destroy, kill, and annihilate all the forces of any people or province that would assault them, both little children and women, and to plunder their possessions. On one day, in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province and published for all people, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers who rode on royal horses went out, hastened and pressed on by the king's command, and the decree was issued in Shushan, or Susa, the citadel. So Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. The Jews had light and gladness, joy and honor. And in every province and city, wherever the king's command and decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. Then many of the people of the land became Jews, because fear of the Jews fell upon them. So, this is the decree that was sent out. It's a big deal. It's gone throughout all of the empire of formerly Babylon, of the Medes and Persians. This kingdom, it's known far and wide now that the Jews have the ability to fight back, okay, to defend themselves. To anyone who who is an enemy of the Jews, they have the ability to fight back. Thoughts or comments through chapter 8?
When the king went out to the garden for a few minutes, if he's replaying in his own mind the conversation with Haman, and if the king had a part in that, so to speak, what his origin for the idea,
right?
You know, how did all that come about, and how now married to a lady, and
yeah. You know, it is interesting whether, and I think I'm going to give the king the benefit of the doubt here that whether he was told it was the Jews or not, that he wasn't really paying attention, or at least if he was paying attention, it wasn't something maybe that registered with him, especially after Esther starts talking. It takes her revealing the fact that she herself is one of these people, of the Jews. And when the king, of course, imagine Haman's reaction. I mean, just oh no. It's the queen is a Jew as well. He had no idea. So it's kind of interesting how that played out.
And also, see, and maybe we'll come back and talk about her later, but Esther, what we call it, being a good politician, she framed us all of what Haman did, his letters, what was his idea, but the king put the stamp of approval on it.
There was no, and king, you signed off on it. There wasn't any of that. It was Haman did this. And again, and some suggest that Haman tricked the king, maybe, especially if he didn't say specifically who it was. Not that the king necessarily would have cared, I don't know. But if it's possible that he did kind of trick the king there. But regardless, she made it all about Haman, because it was all about Haman. Regardless, he took advantage of his position for basically a personal vendetta. That was basically what he did. He made use of his position to play out a personal vendetta or personal grievance. Ultimately, it was against Mordecai, but against all of Mordecai's people as well. All right. Chapter 9, verse 1. On the 12th month, that is the month of Adar, in the 13th day, the time came for the king's command of his decree to be executed. On the day that the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, the opposite occurred, in that the Jews themselves overpowered those who hated them. The Jews gathered together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm. No one could withstand them, because fear of them fell upon all people. And all the officials of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and all those doing the king's work helped the Jews, because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. And of course, Mordecai is now what position? Second in command, and he's a Jew. And so certainly having your ultimate, main boss there, second low before the main boss, the second in command boss, being a Jew, that's going to certainly help you to want to help the Jews at this point. For Mordecai was great in the king's palace. His fame spread throughout all the provinces. For this man Mordecai became increasingly prominent. Thus the Jews defeated all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, with slaughter and destruction. and did what they pleased with those who hated them. And in Shushan, the citadel, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. Also, there's these individuals, the 10 sons of Haman, verse 10, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews, they killed, but they did not lay a hand on the plunder. Which is kind of interesting to me that the reverse was going to be true with Haman and his plans to plunder all of the Jews and take their possessions and their wealth. In this case, they didn't take the plunder. The Jews did not take the plunder of those they killed. On that day, the number of those who were killed in Shushan the citadel was brought to the king. And the king said to Queen Esther, the Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the citadel and the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. Or what is your further request? It shall be done. It's obvious that the king truly cares about Esther. He truly respects her, I don't say he's taken with her, but it's obvious, I mean, from this statement here, that it wasn't just enough that he said, okay, tell me what you want up to half the kingdom, and then ultimately she requests, let the Jews, defend themselves. Now he asks her again, what else can I do for you? What else do you ask? Then Esther said, if it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Shushan to do again tomorrow, according to today's decree. And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. So the king commanded this to be done. The decree was issued in Shushan, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. And the Jews who were in Shushan gathered together again on the 14th day of the month of Adar and killed 300 men at Shushan, for a total of how many in Shushan? 800. 500 the first day, 300 the second day. But they did not lay a hand on the plunder. The remainder of the Jews in the king's provinces gathered together and protected their lives, had rest from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of their enemies. But they did not lay a hand on the plunder. This was the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th of the month they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. So the 13th day, all of the Jews were allowed to do this thing. The 14th day, only the Jews in Shushan were allowed to again attack their enemies. However, the rest of the Jews in the provinces, they had rest on that 14th day. Then in verse 18, the Jews who were at Shushan assembled together on the 13th day as well as on the 14th. And on the 15th day of the month they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages who dwelt in the unwalled towns celebrated the 14th day of the month of Adar with gladness and feasting as a holiday, and for sending presents to one another. And Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews, near and far, who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to establish among them that they should celebrate yearly the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the days on which the Jews had rest from their enemies, as the month which was turned from sorrow to joy for them, and from mourning to a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, of sending presents to one another and gifts to the poor. So the Jews accepted the custom which they had begun, as Mordecai had written to them. Because Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, notice how that's how he's always presented now. It's not just Haman, it's Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to annihilate them and cast Pur, that is the lot, to consume them and destroy them. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letter that this wicked plot which Haman had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. And so they called these days Purim, after the name Pur. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, what they had seen concerning this matter, and what had happened to them, the Jews established and imposed it upon themselves and their descendants, and all who would join them, that without fail they should celebrate these 2 days every year, according to the written instructions and according to the prescribed time. That these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, every city. That these days of Purim should not fail to be observed among the Jews, and that the memory of them should not perish among their descendants. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. And Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, with words of peace and truth. to confirm these days of Purim at their appointed time, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had prescribed for them, and as they had decreed for themselves and their descendants concerning matters of their feasting or fasting and lamenting. So the decree of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. So that concludes everything about Queen Esther. Chapter 10 is almost entirely about Mordecai. So we'll get to chapter 10 in just a second. But what we find is that after all is said and done, Esther asks for a second day for the Jews in Shushan to be able to attack their enemies. She doesn't really give a reason as to why. Maybe more like an exclamation mark, okay, that the king is going to take care of the Jews or protect the Jews. Ultimately, that God is going to protect the Jews. What was the purpose of... In fact, I read a commentary that suggested that Esther was very vindictive in requesting that the 10 sons of Haman be impaled in the gallows. Now remember, they're already dead, okay? They were killed already. What Esther asks is that basically they be impaled, they're already dead, but be shown. Okay, show that these 10 sons of Haman have been killed. You think...
The key word is show. In the day when after Saul has been killed, the Philistines took him up.
Yeah.
Stuck him up
as a trophy.
Entertainment.
Right.
Upper hand.
And ultimately, in a lot of ways, at this point, Haman and his sons represented enemies of the Jews, didn't they? So what message did that send to the enemies of the Jews? Don't mess with the Jews. Okay, that's ultimately what the message was. Do not mess with the Jews, especially knowing now that Queen Esther is a Jew, Mordecai is a Jew, the king is completely fine with protecting the Jews. Now they know. Okay, and the enemies of the Jews better not get any more big britches thinking that they can do what they want. Okay, and I think that's ultimately why I kind of disagreed with that thought that Esther was being vindictive here. I don't think it's vindictive. That implies a hatred. It implies a loathing. I wouldn't say that Esther was having a hatred for Haman or his sons. I think it was more, I don't want to say political, but it was more of a recognition so that everybody would know this is not going to be allowed. Okay, do not harm the people of the Jews. Snoop?
It was their billboard.
Yeah.
You know, they don't have instant messaging or telephones, and to leave a body impaled until it rots or is eaten by the birds. You know, that message is going to be up there for a few months.
Yeah.
And now you have that country being basically run by, the second in charge and
Queen. Yeah.
You know, and I went back and looked at the day that Mordecai said was the same day that they were supposed to do it for Haman.
Yeah.
Yeah, the third day of the month or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever. So it was the same day, they used the same day, but they told the Jews they would defend themselves.
Right.
You know, and to me it says, not only don't mess with the Israelites, but God's in charge.
Yeah.
So whatever your plans are, you better be careful.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what is it they say? Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the God of the Jews, certainly. That this is, even though God is not mentioned by name here in the book of Esther, is not only the fear of the Jews did it come upon the people, but as the Jews are praising Jehovah, certainly they're going to be praising Jehovah for this deliverance. I have no doubt that Mordecai in his decrees to the Jews about Purim, that this be a remembrance of what God has done, even though, again, we don't have that recorded for us. But Mordecai's faith, I'm pretty sure that he mentions God in this decree to these people that we don't have a record of. That being the case, the God of the Jews is going to be feared as well. Okay, if this is what the God of the Jews did for them to protect them from this uprising against them, now there's 2 Jews in the king's house, at least 2 now, and as a result, that could be something that the enemies have to think about. Pam? Yeah. Right. Yeah, like a mother would protect her children, right? Yeah. Yeah, and in a lot of ways, yeah, absolutely. And in a lot of ways, do you see, even though we don't get a feel for the time scale here of how much time passes, but at least in terms of maturity, okay, we already know Esther was fairly mature anyway. But then from chapter 2 to now, okay, you can just see a more self-assuredness, a willingness to put herself out there, a willingness to do what needs to be done for her people. I mean, not that she didn't want to do what needed to be done before, but she was young. And she was, I think you fairly say, she was a little afraid when she told Mordecai, if I were to go to the king and he doesn't ask for me, then he could kill me. And Mordecai kind of strengthens her up a little bit, and she does it anyway. And from that point on, you see her not only the maturity, but the ability to work within the construct, the politics, I don't really like that phrase, but within the rules of the court, whether she asked anybody's advice on how to handle the king. Hey, what would you suggest? Well, maybe throw a banquet for him. We don't read that she did. Whether she came up with this idea on her own or she asked for help, which we know she was willing to ask for help. She wasn't too proud to ask for help. Regardless, she maneuvered. It almost sounds like she manipulated, but she maneuvered the rules of the court in a very mature way. And so you just see her growing each chapter. It's like this more confident, self-assured, willing to do what it takes to protect her people actions from Esther. Yes, ma'am.
Two things. One, with the commentators saying that could be addictive, but to me, it speaks of the providence of God.
Yeah.
I'm sure God directed her to, request that for His glory, that His people are going to remember. And then the second one is, in all your studies, did it ever mention how much time passed between Haman's edict and Mordecai's edict?
Well, one commentary between chapter 1 and chapter 2 said that they thought it was about 4 years that passed. Because during chapter 1 and chapter 2, the Greek wars were happening. That was the Battle of Thermopylae and something else. And so there was a long time in between chapter 1 and chapter 2. Now, in terms of the rest of it, they thought it happened over the course of about 1 year. Because,
It's a long time to sit around worrying that somebody's going to kill you.
well, yeah. But I didn't quite understand exactly how that worked, but apparently the way the calendar worked for the Babylonians, it was some sort of a fate-based calendar, which is why they cast lots. So they would cast lots. In fact, even when Haman, it says he kept casting lots until it fell upon an appropriate day. Okay, and so the casting of lots, there were certain times of the year and certain times of the month that were considered unlucky or bad, whereas other parts of the year and other parts of the month were considered fate or fateful or good luck. And so he kept casting lots until it landed on the third day of the 12th month as being, that's a lucky day, so that's the day I'm going to choose because that means things will work in my favor. Okay, that's where the whole idea of pur comes from, the casting of lots. And that's what that means, is you cast lots. They don't know exactly how the lots worked in terms of day and month or exactly how those things worked, but they would cast lots until it fell upon a certain day of a certain month that was considered lucky or blessed by the gods. And that was the day that he chose.
So do you think the initial edict had, on the third day of the 12th month, we're going to annihilate the Jews, and then Mordecai found it? I mean, we know that the Jews knew that they were a part of it.
Yeah, well, they sent out the decree. That's how Mordecai found out.
Right.
Was the decree went out everywhere.
So I know. So what I'm saying is, if they think it was 12 months, that's a long time to sit around thinking about your neighbor's going to kill you.
Yeah, we're assuming that maybe there may have been a little bit of time that passed to get that edict done and everything like that. It may have been a couple months, but you're still looking at least most estimates put it between 7 and 8 months that you're looking at.
Enough time to get the second edict out
That's right. That's right.
And the Jews.
So there was still some time in there to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're looking at about 7 months, 6 months, 7 months, 8 months, something like that. But you're right. I mean, even a week would be a long time to have to think about that or worry about that all of our people are going to be destroyed all in one day, and maybe not totally destroyed, but you know.
It causes me to wonder, like, were they not going to be able to defend themselves before the second edict came out? They were just going to have to take it?
Yeah. That would seem to be the implication.
Well, that's surely not our culture today.
No, it's not. No, it's not. But yeah, it would seem to be the implication that they would not have been allowed, they wouldn't have been allowed to congregate together to defend themselves, at the very least. Now, maybe individually they could have, but to be able to actually gather, in some totalitarian governments, there's a restriction on how many people you can have gathered together in one place. Well, this would be a gathering of Jews, and there's a whole bunch of them in every city, in every province. So that's what was being allowed to defend themselves. I'm guessing that's what they wouldn't have been allowed to do under the first edict. Nolan?
One, first of all, they're people living in captivity. They weren't prepared to do
Oh,
that,
yeah.
to defend themselves.
Well, and it's been several generations also since the taking away into captivity, so it's not like they're trained to do this either.
The passing of time allowed then by the providence of God, Mordecai getting in position where he's powerful, and it swayed the whole mindset of everybody turns to their side.
Yeah.
Where all of the king's people, we're going to help them
Well,
fight.
think about weapons. I mean, where are the Jews going to get all the weapons that they needed to defend themselves? Well, now the governors and the satraps and all these people can supply them with those weapons. It says they helped them. I can only imagine that weapons had to be a part of that. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
A little thought, from Haman's original letter, we're going to do this fighting, when you wipe them out, take the prey. When Mordecai frames his letter, he says, no, we're going to fight back and win some, take the spoils of the prey. And yet, several times it's noted the Jews do not touch this spoil.
Yes. Yes.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and it's interesting because, in fact, let's see, is it chapter 10? No, okay. At least there was a couple commentaries that mentioned that they noticed that as well, and the only thing they could figure was that the reason why the Jews unitedly did not take of the spoils was to put the best light on Queen Esther that they could, because they wanted it shown that they weren't doing this to gain riches. They were doing this for the survival of their people. Now, that's not explained to us specifically as to why they chose to do that, but they did not take of the spoils. And they could have, but they didn't. They chose not to. But it's interesting that it wasn't just in Sushan. It was all over. No one... Man, that bell rings quicker and quicker every single time. No one took of the spoils. And it's interesting to me that there seems to have been a universal understanding by the Jews there that we're not doing this for the money. We're not doing this to see what we can take from our enemies. This is about Jehovah. This is about respecting Queen Esther, about Mordecai. This is about protecting ourselves. It's not about the spoils.
It seems strange that Mordecai, who's well respected and has the power, he specifically wrote that in there to do it. My only thought was, if perhaps somebody had faith in the prophets that when your remnant were going to go home, don't get involved in more of this stuff to anchor us here.
Yeah. Possessions and
Right.
Yeah.
Houses or whatever,
all that would be involved in the spoils. Yeah, that could be. That could be. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I guess it certainly shows that this is not some kind of civil war taking place. This is only for the purpose of protecting ourselves. That's what this is about. Whereas if it was eye for an eye type of thing, you're going to spoil our stuff, we're going to spoil yours, then it would almost be like a civil war, and it might have gotten the king concerned a little bit. So it's possible that politics may have played a little bit into it. Yeah. Yes, sir.
May not have anything to do with it, but taking
That's true.
Exactly.
That's true. Yeah, taking of the spoils by the Israelites hasn't worked out very well, especially when they were told not to. Yeah, those losses from the city of Ai, that kind of stuck with them. I couldn't know. That's right. Yeah. What was produced by the spoil out of Egypt? That golden calf. Yeah. So, yeah, and in a lot of ways, it shows their commitment and devotion to the service of Jehovah, their faith in Him, and that it's not about faith in possessions. I mean, I wouldn't have said it was wrong for them to do it. Mordecai, allowed it, but they focused on only what they needed to do, not what they had the right or ability to do, only what they needed to do. Kind of an offshoot of what Paul says, all things are lawful, but not all things edify or are helpful. Okay? So I think that's an extra point there. All right. Let's see. What does Esther's, with our questions on Esther, what does Esther's willingness to obey Mordecai teach us? Not only when she was growing up, but even after she was older. She was the queen.
That sometimes you have to do the hard thing.
Okay. She was humble. She was submissive. She was willing to yield. She was willing to yield to the wisdom of older individuals. Okay. First of all, with Mordecai. Second of all, with Haggai, the eunuch who was in charge of all these ladies. So she was submissive. She was willing to yield. She was willing to listen. It seemed like she really learned to be mature. Okay. She kind of respected that authority that existed even when she was older, and she technically had authority over Mordecai, being queen. She respected his authority. Anything? Does anybody have anything else on question 1?
I just think that, so many times, I'm going to use this as an example, people will advise people who are getting in a new relationship or something that maybe this isn't the person for you, or,
Yeah.
Be careful, but they get too emotionally attached, and they can't listen to the
Yeah.
advice of those that are looking at it from a different vantage point.
That's a great
Esther
point.
definitely said, okay, this is the right thing, I'll do it. She
Right.
did hard things, even though, it was just a hard.
Emotionally, it was a difficult thing to do. And that's a great point, especially for young people, because emotions, especially with things going on in their mind, emotions can easily override our better judgment. Okay, and we've all been there. We've all made mistakes. Yeah. Oh, she had to be. If I perish, I perish, she said. So, yeah, absolutely. All right, we will stop there. We will finish Mordecai next week, one way or the other. Okay, we will finish Mordecai next Wednesday night. And then after that, the next Wednesday night after that will be Gaius and Demetrius and Dodgeface. Thank you, everybody.